That's what you're doing when you're seeking an advisor. And you should be able to ask the advisor something about the topic, and that advisor could be anywhere, as we'll see later on, right? Keeping in mind that in some instances the entire semester is dedicated to research in some form or the other, right? Then you keep in mind, of course, that you have to obtain and review the thesis guidelines for the institution, or understand what it is that the department, in this case, requires, so that you can start the process. All right. Now, for yourself, assume that your work is going to be submitted to Cornell University, that is to Tina and the university, on May 15th or May 10th, whatever the deadline is this year, right? Before handing in that bound work, it has to be signed. The last thing that I do as a thesis advisor is sign the thesis or the project report, okay? That means you have to find me, okay? And if you're in a hurry on the 15th, right, and it seems like the end of the world is coming, it may take a day or so to project or to realize that you have to do that. So, normally it takes at least a few days to have your committee members sign the approval forms before I sign the final abstract page, the thesis itself, right, as your advisor. Because your committee has to approve what it is you finally produced. So we back up the calendar, right? That brings us to, in this case, May 12th. Before obtaining these signatures, the candidate must have created a number of copies of this black book-like work. You got to go through binding, right? You better believe everybody and their mother is binding their theses in May and April, which means there's a backup at the bindery. And this place only has a limited number of bindery. It's not like you have binderies on every street corner, right? So you really want to be thinking about that the copying and the binding of the work may take a week if you're doing it in April and May. There are hundreds of these things. You're going to be trooping around the quad with your classmates at the master's level, and you're going to see thousands of people just like you that have done these works, right? So you got to think about what it is, the little itty bitty binder, right? The poor binder, even working 3 shifts, as they do, 3 shifts around the clock, right? Because they make money fast in these binding, because you want to pay them fast. You'll even pay them the expedited fee, I'm guaranteeing. Because you want to get ahead of the line, right? Just beware, right? That binding may take. So that brings us to May 5th, right? What I'm saying is we have to move forward, right? Before that, before you take it to the binder, you have to do the copying necessary, right? And that has to be approved by your committee as well. Oh, where's your committee? What do you want? They're off doing whatever, right? So that brings you back to April 28th, right? This means your defense must be scheduled and passed by this point in time. But that's not all, right? If you stop to think about it, April 28th, there's more to the story. Generally, the paperwork to schedule the defense requires signatures, and by university regulations, you got to post a week in advance, okay? So the thesis has effectively have to be done before you schedule the defense, and that's a week before you schedule the defense. That's a week before April 28th. So we're now in the middle of April. You see how your anxiety level is rising? Right? You see? I can see it in your eyes. I mean, it's very clear. Anxiety level rising.
The snow might not melt yet by that time.
The snow may not melt by that time. The world may not be green as it is now, right? I mean, we look at the sunshine, there may not be a whole lot of sunshine until then, right? You understand that's the world as it changes, right? So, this means that the first week in April is the latest point at which you must have a completed first draft. Now, to get to a completed first draft, your committee has to have read it. Oh, well, when does that occur? In the previous month. Right? And if you work backward further, if you assume the first draft in a thesis is 100 pages, a project report will be maybe 50 pages, right? But nevertheless, you've got to chase down your advisors, right, to read the draft so that they're comfortable with it. They will make the corrections, right, that you will make while you're scheduling. You'll be working frantically, I know you will, because the material comes back to you from your advisors and you have to make the corrections in such a way as to defend that draft in the defense, right? So when you look at it, working backwards again, you have to produce, on the average, 3 pages a day, and that means that you have to begin somewhere in January if you're doing a project report without any doubt. Question?
So in the defense, you're defending a draft that you've revised based on the comments of your committee, but they've not seen again until
well, what happens is you submit the material for, generally I would suggest, to your chair first, okay? And your chair will say this, that, and the other thing. Now, sometimes chairs will say, when I trust you enough by virtue of our relationship to produce a relatively clean draft that you can also share with your second committee member. Okay, let's say, for example, I'm your advisor and Pike's your second committee member for the sake of argument, okay? You submit a draft to me, and I know that your writing and your performance has been sufficient, that it's not going to be too messy, right? And I say to you, go ahead and submit it to Pike, and ask whether Pike has the time to read the draft. But that assumes, of course, that he and I are not going to be making the same comments. You see? I don't want to put Pike as a second committee member in the position of making grammatical changes, right, as a second committee member. That's my responsibility, to make sure the argument, the grammar, the illustrations, the captions, the substance of the work is essentially ready to be read by a second committee member, right? From your point of view, you don't want to, approach Pike as a second committee member, or anybody as a member of the faculty as a second committee member, and say, oh, I'll help you. No. We're all too busy, right, to get involved in all of us doing your grammatical, addressing grammatical questions and structural issues. It has to be pretty clean before you begin to think about the end of the draft being ready for defense. Okay? Make sense? Everybody understand? Any other questions about that? It's just being courteous to the faculty and thinking about it in a timely fashion. Remember, you all are all going to be graduating at the same time, right? And I may be a wizard at reading these things, right? But I'm not that great a wizard when I get 10 of them at the same time, right? I have to put them in a pecking order, in a priority order. First in, first out. And most of us operate on the same general principle, right? Which is, again, one of the things you think about. If you have an advisor who is otherwise occupied, right? Or is supposed to be doing something else, the reality is you have to take that into consideration as well. Okay? And I'm thinking of 1 or 2 faculty members who will be on leave, for example, in the spring, who technically are relieved from the responsibility of doing any reviews at all. Okay? It shifts the balance of those of us who remain, available for your purposes. Okay? Any other questions? That was a good question, and it's the kind of question that, as it occurs to you, by all means, raise your hands. There's no reason, not to get it out on the table. So, working backward then, you're thinking about writing at least 3 months earlier than when it is you think you're going to finish. Okay? You can do it. It's just a matter of being careful about what it is you're doing with your time. Handy thesis sheet number 103. Preparing your office. When you're writing, where it is that you're going to work. You find a place that you can nest and you protect it from intruders. No chipmunks, no dogs, no cats, right? The refrigerator at some distance, right? Couches and beds at some distance. You think that somehow or another, oh, I'm always more comfortable in bed, sitting up doing my thesis. And that'll happen, right? Maintaining a regular work schedule is of paramount importance. Okay? A regular schedule. This doesn't mean that you can work Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.